Hi and welcome to my channel. The video today will be about grid method of drawing. With this method you can take any photo and turn it into a drawing that you can use for your paintings. This video will explain how to do it, the equipment you need, and also how to scale up or scale down depending on the size of your canvas. I'm Debs, the artist behind paintwithdebs.co.uk. If you'd like to see more of my weekly videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hello again. In this video, we're going to go over how to use the grid method. It's another technique that many artists use. I think it's particularly known amongst portrait artists because it's a way of getting a very good likeness. It's great as a method also of learning how to draw because you'll start to pay a lot of attention to the detail. We've got a ruler, we'll have some paper and pencils, and that's all you need really. Make sure your pencils are sharp, and here you can see that I've got a normal pencil and I've also got a charcoal white pencil, with the idea that this is a very dark background, and so in order for it to show up we could do with a white grid. The only thing you have to think in terms of your grid, well, two things perhaps. One is, how large would you like your grid to be? If you need a lot of detail you would like a smaller squares. If you need less detail, you can use a grid that's just a couple of lines, just to give you an idea. Perhaps when you're doing a landscape, it would just make sure that you've got things in the right area and gives you a guide really. On this particular drawing that I'm doing, I've actually decided to do 2 centimetre squares on here, and initially I had used the white charcoal, but I was a little concerned that you wouldn't actually see the lines, so I've done this grid in an app. So this is another thing that you can do, and I will put that in the download section about what app I've used, but I think it's called Gridmaker. So as you can see, within the app you would put the number of rows that you need, and then it will automatically put in the number of columns, or vice versa. But if you're actually drawing it out yourself, what you need to make sure, it doesn't really matter how many centimetres this is, but I mean in this case it's 2 centimetres, but you need to do this in squares, otherwise you're going to get into a right mess. Although you can do it in all sorts of ways. You can do diagonals, you could do things that are of different proportions. It's much easier to grid up and grid down if you've got squares. Now I'm thinking, right, okay, so we've done our grid, we need to now label the grid. Now if you've got something like Gridmaker, it'll label it for you. If you're actually labelling it yourself, what you need to do is you need to start at the top, and you need to just, you know, label your rows A, B, C, D, E, etc. If you look in here, then this would be A1. This square here would be F3. And an easy way to see that, if you had used an app, the app will label it all up for you, as you can see in this photograph. Now, what I've done here, because this is a little bit more complicated, the eye section, or there might be another area that you would like to look at in more detail, you can always do an extra grid. So here I have labelled this at the 1 centimetre mark, which is halfway. I've put an extra line. So I've just gone 1 centimetre, and we've just done, and by doing this you can put a little, we've got smaller squares here so we can get more detail in. Now, how do you transfer this onto your sheet of paper? Now, if it's a sheet of paper exactly the same size, then we would be creating squares that are just 2 centimetre by 2 centimetre again. So for instance, if I do it onto this 9 by 12 board, it's roughly the same And because there is, you know, just quite a lot of dark area, in fact I could bring it slightly down and have more dark at the top. So when I transfer it onto an A4 sheet of paper, I'm just going to create this grid in exactly the same way. So I'm going to, in fact it starts a little bit in, so you can even be very precise. I could even mark the things, but let's just, so I'm just going to, every 2 centimetres I will mark. So here you can see I've done all of the grids, and I'm doing it in a simple, this is like 2 centimetres to 2 centimetres. So this drawing will be exactly the same as this one. I'm doing it on paper with the idea that I'm going to do a black canvas and trace down from here. However, the idea is that you would actually convert this to whatever size canvas you're going to move the drawing to. So for example, I'm going to get this larger canvas, and if I measure this larger canvas, I've actually got a really big ruler here. Here I've got 40 centimetres, and in order to grid up to this size, you can see it's a lot larger. I need to not worry about centimetres, I need to look at the number of squares. Right, so we've got 40 centimetres divided by the number of squares that we've got. I've actually got it here, I've put 13, so I've divided it by 13 to get onto this canvas. It only has to be approximate because we're just trying to work out roughly where we want our squares. Here, if I wanted to go straight onto here, and I would be dividing the squares here by 3 and creating a grid of 3. If you do that, of course, this is on a white canvas, we're going to have to definitely paint over afterwards, but that's fine, you can do that. The only problem with this is that you have to really be careful about being just a little bit light. It's not going to be a huge problem on here because I'm planning to paint it black with hints of colour in the background, so it's going to cover that up. It's not an issue. I'm looking to see where different areas have crossed, and I think it's about there. If you look where this has stopped, it's just over the halfway line. Now I'm doing this by eye. I could even measure it at this point, but I'm not going to do that. So we're going to do that. We come up here. Now you could be really precise. We need to know where that's crossing. So if you look where things are crossing, first of all, this is C8. Look at C8. You know which square you're working in. And then find whereabouts it's crossing on this line. So I'm looking, that's halfway. It's a little bit to the right of halfway is where the feather crosses. And then you look at the angle. And this is why it can help with your drawing so much, because you start to really observe what's there. Instead of, if you're doing a trace down, although you have some observation, your observation's more about where to put the tone in, that sort of thing. If we look at the next one, we're going up to there. So I know that in B7, we're going to be crossing the line around there, and it's sort of wave formation like that. I'm looking at the shapes of the feathers now as well. So if you were doing a drawing, you'd be very precise, but bear in mind that you are going to be painting as well, so you'll be going back to the drawing and looking at how this comes out in the painting. Some of these spikes might be quite important. So if we look at B4 and we look at how these spike formations are happening, I think that's quite important. So let's have a look here. Where's that cross? What angle is it? Where does it cross again? Here we've got A5 to B5. Whereabouts is it crossing? Because to me that's about, and A5 to B5, and we're crossing about there, but then it's also coming back down in that angle. So you're looking at these as shapes. That's sort of a triangle. You've got your rubber. So I don't normally use a rubber, but I think for this it's useful to have one handy. So that's C2 to D2. You also could do with putting in a little bit of detail in the centre. So the reason that you could do the detail is to show the shading. If it was a portrait, if it was a human portrait, you'd put in lines to show where the tones are. It's all about tonal mapping with a human portrait. But here we're actually looking to see where these shadow areas are. And it's worth sometimes putting where the particularly dark shadow areas are. You can add things later, but I would, for instance, be putting this area in here. I've already started to put in this eye, but I did want to point out we've not only put this square here, we've also put this square across here. We need to see whereabouts this dark part finishes, and it's before here. It's before this edge, you see? Look at the angle. I'm going to carry on with this, go through it, take it steady, enjoy it, because it is enjoyable. It's just a little bit time consuming. Okay, so, and I will see you in the next painting where we actually do the background and we'll put these drawings on top. So hopefully I've explained this enough. I'm going to put the Gridmaker and the calculation, how to do the calculation, in a separate worksheet. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. In the next part of this series, we'll be covering how to paint the bald eagle, which is the photo that I've used in this video. For this photo, I found it on Pexels, where people share their photos freely. So if you haven't got a photo of your own, it's fine. You can find things online that are copyright free, as long as you make sure that that's okay to share. So I'll put the details about that below. I hope you enjoy this video. If you do, and you want to see the video next week about how to paint the bald eagle, press the bell and you'll get a notification next week.